The lights of the studio glowed like a fire on the edge of a storm. The set of the Great American Debate was alive. Cameras rolling, crowd cheering, a sea of faces holding signs, red hats, and glowing phones. The room was split, both in color and belief. On one side, MAGA supporters waved flags and chanted USA. On the other, young fans of Taylor Swift raised signs reading, "Justice for Women," and "Fearless." In the center of it all stood the stage. 2 podiums. 2 women. 2 different worlds. Taylor Swift walked out first, dressed in a stunning white dress, her blonde hair glowing under the studio lights. She smiled, waved, then rested her hand gently on the podium. The crowd roared, especially her fans. It was her first political debate. And she wasn't here to perform. She was here to fight, to speak up for what she believed in. Her music had touched hearts across the world, but tonight, her words had to hit harder than any song. On the opposite side, Karoline Leavitt stepped into view. A navy blue suit hugged her shoulders with sharp precision. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply walked to her podium, nodded once, and placed a small folder on the side of her podium. The cameras zoomed in. A red tab peeked out from the folder. Something confidential. Something she hadn't brought by accident. The moderator, Miles Granger, an older journalist known for covering wars and Washington, raised his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and slow. "Welcome to a historic moment. Tonight, culture and politics meet. Art and authority collide. On this stage, 2 women of power will debate 4 major issues: women's rights, climate change, online misinformation, and audience questions. This is more than a debate. It's a national reckoning." The crowd erupted once more, but it was quickly brought to silence as the camera zoomed in on Swift's face. "Miss Swift," Miles said, "you may begin." Taylor took a breath. She didn't look nervous, but her eyes were searching, perhaps for the right words, or maybe for a signal from the crowd. She leaned into the microphone. "I want to start by thanking everyone who believes that speaking up matters," she said. "Women's rights are not just a political issue. They're personal. Every woman, every girl who's been told to sit down or stay quiet deserves a voice. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to protect those voices." She paused, letting the words settle. "When lawmakers take steps to control our bodies, our choices, or our voices, we all lose something. I've seen it in my own life, through fans, through friends, through stories sent to me in letters. We need leaders who lift women up, not push them back." Cheers broke out on the left side of the crowd. Signs waved. Tears glistened in the eyes of young women in the audience. Phones recorded every second. Swift was doing what she did best, connecting. The energy was on her side, for now. But Karoline Leavitt hadn't moved. She stood still, calm. Her eyes fixed on Swift, and on that folder. Miles turned toward her. "Miss Leavitt, your response?" Karoline adjusted her microphone with care. She tilted her head slightly, then smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was tight, controlled. "I admire Taylor's passion," she began. "She's used her platform to bring attention to important issues. That matters." There was a pause. Taylor looked over, slightly surprised. "But let's be honest," Karoline continued, her voice sharpening like a blade. "This isn't a concert. It's a conversation about leadership, policy, reality. I don't sing songs, I make decisions, real ones." The MAGA side of the crowd began to cheer. "I've worked inside the White House. I've sat in rooms where real change was decided. I was appointed the youngest White House press secretary in American history. Not because I sang about it, because I earned it." She placed her hand lightly on the folder. The red tab caught the light again. And while some talk about women's empowerment from a stage, I've lived it from the front lines of politics. The room shifted. The crowd's energy flipped. Now the right side of the crowd was standing, cheering. Taylor blinked, but stayed calm. She wasn't new to criticism. But this wasn't like a tabloid headline. This was live. And Leavitt, she, had come prepared. Backstage, Taylor's manager watched nervously. He whispered into a mic. "She's holding something. A file. Check what it could be." On stage, Leavitt didn't reveal what was inside the folder yet, but she glanced down at it once more, then looked directly at Taylor. "I believe in women. I believe in freedom, but I also believe in facts. And before this night ends, I intend to share some." The crowd hushed. Even Taylor didn't respond right away. For a second, the whole stage felt like it had frozen. The first shots had been fired, but the war was only beginning. The silence after Karoline Leavitt's final line wasn't just dramatic. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. Taylor, Swift's hands rested gently on the edge of her podium. She wasn't rattled, but her eyes had narrowed slightly, reading Leavitt's body language. The file was still untouched, but its presence now hovered over the debate like a shadow. The audience felt it too. Even the most distracted phone-scrolling viewers had put their screens down. Moderator Miles Granger cleared his throat and gestured smoothly. "Miss Swift, rebuttal?" Taylor leaned forward, her voice clear and composed. "Karoline, you talk about facts and earning things. That's great, but no one here doubts your resume. What I'm talking about are millions of women who don't get those chances. Women who work double shifts, raise kids alone, fight for affordable health care and equal pay, and still get ignored. We can't compare experiences when the system doesn't give us equal ground." A wave of applause erupted again from the progressive side of the crowd. Young women clapped and stood. Someone shouted, "Speak for us, Taylor." And she did, her voice rising now, infused with emotional power. "I'm not here as a pop star tonight. I'm here because I've been silent too long. And silence is dangerous, especially when powerful people rewrite reality." The camera panned to Leavitt, whose smile didn't fade. But she raised her hand slightly, requesting to speak. Miles nodded. "Go ahead, Miss Leavitt." She opened the folder slowly, not revealing its contents yet, just enough for the camera to catch a glimpse of a thick set of documents inside. The pages were stamped, some were blacked out, and one bore a government seal. "I was hoping you'd bring up rewriting reality," Karoline said softly, her tone calm but laced with iron. "Because that's exactly what I've been investigating," the audience murmured. Even the moderator looked surprised. "These," she continued, holding up a page, "are transcripts, government files, not gossip, not lyrics, real communications involving your activism." She emphasized the last word. Taylor tilted her head, confused. "What are you talking about?" Karoline held the document higher. "You want to talk about using platforms to speak truth? Fine. But the truth is, in 2022, you had direct contact with senior advisors in the Office of Global Media, the same office that was tied to a now-shelved disinformation operation targeting foreign influencers. Some of those emails suggest that your political statements weren't entirely personal." The room went still. Miles frowned. "That's a serious accusation." Karoline's tone didn't waver. "It's not an accusation. It's a question, one that should have been asked years ago. Why was a global pop icon, supposedly speaking as a private citizen, consulting with operatives connected to national image campaigns?" Taylor's face changed, barely, but noticeably. Her eyes tightened, lips pressed into a thin line. The crowd began whispering. Even her fans seemed uncertain. Was this true? Could she have been working with government media agencies? She finally spoke, That's nonsense. I've had public conversations with leaders. That's part of advocacy. There's nothing secretive about it. I've never coordinated messaging with government agencies. That file is full of assumptions and distortions. Leavitt didn't back down. Really? Then why were your speeches, almost word for word, reflected in the internal drafts of an EU-American climate narrative strategy? A document marked classified coordination material? Taylor stared at her. That's a lie. It's on paper, Karoline said. We'll let the audience decide. The moderator stepped in. All right, we will request verification on these claims. For now, let's keep this civil. We're not a courtroom. But it was already too late for civil. On Twitter, hashtags were exploding. One Swift leaks, Karoline vs. Taylor, Great American Debate. Political analysts scrambled to get copies of the file. News tickers began running. Breaking. Leavitt drops alleged government file implicating Swift in messaging operation. Backstage, Taylor's publicist was frantically texting someone. Her legal team was already drafting a response. Meanwhile, Leavitt stood poised, unshaken. Swift returned to the mic, her voice lower now, more deliberate. Let me be very clear. I have never been part of any propaganda effort. My mission is to raise awareness, to encourage compassion, and to make sure young people know they matter. The words hit the right emotional chords. A few fans cheered again. But the sense of disruption had settled in. The power dynamic had shifted. Karoline didn't need to win the argument tonight. She had planted the doubt. The kind of doubt that outlives headlines. The kind that trends. As the moderator moved to the next topic, climate change, both women stood ready. But the debate was no longer about issues. It was about trust and secrets. And in this kind of battle, one exposed document could burn louder than 1,000 voices. The next segment began, but the energy in the studio had changed. Something was off, like the crowd had just watched a mask slip. Taylor Swift adjusted her posture slightly, stealing a breath that didn't quite land. Karoline Leavitt didn't move at all. She stood still, spine straight, her fingers lightly touching the folder that now sat closed on her podium. The debate had moved to climate change, but the real heat was elsewhere. Moderator Miles Granger tried to reset the tone. Let's talk climate policy. Miss Swift, you've been vocal about environmental activism. What should America do next? Taylor offered a tight smile and spoke clearly, though a hint of frustration crept into her voice. This is something that can't wait. I've spent time with scientists, climate advocates, and youth leaders from across the country. They're terrified. Wildfires in California, floods in Florida, rising temperatures. It's no longer abstract. We need clean energy now, not in 20 years, not in political talking points. I support a carbon-neutral future by 2035. Applause erupted again. A few young activists in the front row stood with banners. A man yelled, "We love you, Taylor." But it was short-lived. Karoline waited for the noise to settle before stepping in. Climate change is real, she began, nodding. But so is energy poverty. So is the cost of groceries, fuel, and electricity for working families. Taylor talks about deadlines. I talk about jobs, real jobs. We can't destroy the American economy chasing the fantasy of zero emissions by 2035. And while Taylor was meeting with climate influencers, I was in Ohio, with workers who lost everything after their factory shut down, because the government transitioned their town out of relevance. Her words didn't roar. They landed like hammers. I believe in balance, Karoline continued. We need cleaner energy, but not at the cost of national collapse. You think the environment suffers now? Wait until we're importing 90% of our energy from China because we banned drilling. The MAGA supporters cheered, chanting USA briefly before being silenced by the host. Taylor leaned into her mic. Karoline, I'm not here to destroy the economy. But we can't pretend like protecting the environment and creating jobs are separate. Look at Germany. Look at New Zealand. Green energy creates opportunity. Leavitt smiled faintly, almost like she'd been waiting for that line. Germany? She asked. You mean the country that had to restart coal plants last year, or the one begging Russia for gas in the winter? That's your model? A few gasps sounded. Even some independents in the room were nodding now. Taylor was about to respond when Karoline shifted gears again. Let's be honest, she said, lifting the file again. Climate isn't the only place where Taylor's image doesn't match reality. Miles Granger quickly intervened. Miss Leavitt, we're moving into climate. Let's avoid personal attacks. I'm not attacking, Karoline replied coolly. Just pointing out something strange. While Taylor speaks about climate justice, her private jet logs, obtained legally, show over 150 flights in a year. That includes a 15-minute flight between two cities in the same state. A shocked murmur raced across the audience. Taylor opened her mouth but paused. There was no denial this time. The data was public. Still, she composed herself. I've addressed this before. I often lease my jet to others, and I offset my carbon footprint with environmental contributions. Karoline stepped in again. Offsets don't erase hypocrisy. If a politician did what you did, you'd be the first to call them out. The tension now was almost unbearable. On social media, the comment sections were exploding. Leavitt is bringing fire. Taylor didn't expect this. Can we talk about the jet thing? That's not nothing. Where's the truth? Who's spinning harder? Backstage, Taylor's manager whispered urgently into a phone, calling in legal and PR teams. They knew how this would play out. Perception is reality. And right now, the perception was cracking. Taylor kept calm, her voice now more vulnerable, but still strong. I understand I live a privileged life. I don't deny that. But I use my voice and my resources to help where I can. That's more than most. The crowd responded, this time a mix of cheers and quiet disbelief. The emotional connection with Taylor was still there, but the room had cooled. Leavitt didn't smile. She didn't need to. The facts she had delivered weren't just arguments. They were pressure points, and she was hitting them with surgical precision. The debate wasn't over, but the power had shifted again, and deep in the control room, one of the studio producers muttered to himself, "This isn't a debate anymore. It's an unraveling." The moderator's voice carried across the silent room like a news anchor announcing an emergency. Next, topic: misinformation and media bias. The timing couldn't have been more dangerous for Taylor Swift. Still recovering from the jet exposure, she now had to walk through a minefield with cameras rolling and every word recorded for millions. Taylor straightened herself, slowly gathering control of her breath. Her voice was soft but steady, like a song building toward a chorus. Misinformation, she said, isn't just about fake news. It's about silencing truth. It's about algorithms that feed hate, about coordinated attacks on people who speak out. I've seen it personally. I've spoken up about voting, rights, about reproductive freedom, and suddenly I'm flooded with abuse, threats, smears. She glanced at the audience, some nodding, some looking skeptical. I'm not a politician, but I'm not blind. There's a war on truth happening online, and it's hurting people, especially women, young voters, minorities. Applause rose from her supporters. In the back row, a group of college students held up signs that read, "Truth is power," and "We stand with Taylor." She turned directly toward Karoline. And let's be honest, some political figures thrive on this misinformation. They retweet false claims, spread fear, and then claim victimhood when held accountable. Leavitt didn't flinch. She'd heard every word, and she had been preparing for this moment all evening. Taylor, I understand how it feels to be targeted, Karoline replied. I've had my address leaked. I've had protesters outside. My home. But let's not pretend the media is some neutral victim. Let's not act like your side hasn't weaponized it too. A buzz stirred in the room. Leavitt pulled out a printed social media post. A tweet. "Here's a tweet from Taylor's verified account from last year," she said, holding it up to the camera, where she called half the country dangerous extremists for voting Republican. That's not unity. That's misinformation too, disguised as virtue. Gasps echoed through the studio. Taylor started to respond, but Karoline didn't stop. "You claim to fight hate," she continued, "but you're perfectly fine labeling everyone who disagrees with you as bigots. You say you're not a politician, but you speak like one when the lights are on." Taylor's fans shouted in protest, but the MAGA section of the crowd stood and clapped. Miles, the moderator, raised his hand. "Let's bring this back to policy. Miss Swift, how do you believe we should combat misinformation on both sides?" Taylor collected herself. "I believe in accountability. Social platforms must take responsibility. We can't allow people to manipulate truth for personal gain, left or right. And no, calling out injustice is not misinformation. It's courage." Her eyes were fiery now. Her voice had recovered its power. "I will not apologize for standing against racism, against voter suppression, or against a system that protects the powerful while punishing the vulnerable." The audience applauded again, louder this time. Karoline, calm and deliberate, replied, "And I won't apologize for defending free speech. You don't fight misinformation by silencing opposing voices. You fight it by putting all the facts on the table, even the ones that make people uncomfortable." She tapped the folder again, still resting on her podium. Miles leaned in. "Miss Leavitt, are you suggesting you have more facts relevant to this debate?" Leavitt's eyes didn't leave Taylor's. "I'm saying," she replied slowly, "that our country has been told a lot of half-truths, and some of those half-truths involve people who speak the loudest on morality, while hiding things they hope never come to light." Taylor blinked, a visible pause. "What are you implying?" she asked, her voice still sharp, but the rhythm had shifted. Karoline didn't answer. Not yet. The moderator quickly moved on to audience questions, but the tension had already reached a breaking point. The sense in the room wasn't just suspense. It was dread. Viewers at home could feel it too. Social media exploded with speculation. What is Leavitt holding back? Does she have dirt on Taylor? This is turning into a full-on investigation. Backstage, producers were panicking. PR teams were on edge. And Taylor's manager whispered to a campaign aide, "If she has what I think she has, this could be catastrophic." Meanwhile, Karoline calmly reached for a glass of water, smiling faintly to herself. She wasn't just debating anymore. She was preparing for detonation. The air inside the studio had shifted. What began as a televised political debate was now teetering on the edge of something far more serious. Taylor Swift, once confident and poised, now stood slightly rigid. She'd caught the look in Karoline, Leavitt's eyes, a mix of precision and purpose. Something was coming, and it wasn't just a rebuttal. Miles, the moderator, cleared his throat, sensing the energy in the room. We now move to our final topic before closing remarks: foreign influence and national security. It was supposed to be a broad policy discussion, but Karoline had no intention of keeping it broad. Taylor stepped forward, her voice calmer, more cautious. Foreign influence is real. We've seen it. From election interference to propaganda farms. But national security doesn't mean building higher walls. It means building stronger values. Unity, truth, diplomacy. Applause followed, mostly from her base. But it wasn't as loud as before. Her rhythm had weakened. She felt it. Karoline, on the other hand, looked freshly energized. She calmly placed both hands on her podium. National security isn't about slogans, she said. It's about knowing who's funding what, who's influencing who, and what deals are being made in the shadows. Taylor tilted her head slightly, confused. Leavitt tapped the folder again, this time deliberately. I wasn't going to bring this up tonight, she said. I thought maybe this could stay, behind closed doors. But then I realized, if someone's going to stand on a national stage and lecture America about morality and truth, they better be ready to face their own. The crowd gasped, sensing the moment was real. Karoline opened the folder slowly. Inside were printed documents, emails, and one grainy photo. She held it up for the cameras. This, she said clearly, is a photograph taken in 2016 at a closed-door environmental summit in Oslo. Most people didn't know it happened. But someone very famous was there, Taylor Swift, alongside a now-sanctioned foreign energy investor tied to Russian state contracts. Gasps turned into murmurs. The camera zoomed in on the photograph, a younger Taylor sitting at a long conference table, smiling politely. Across from her sat a man the State Department had later blacklisted. Taylor's jaw tightened. She looked at her team off camera. One of them was already on their phone, likely calling legal. Karoline continued. This summit was funded by a supposedly neutral climate NGO. Turns out, the NGO received $4.8 million in dark money traced back to offshore energy firms, later linked to sanctioned Russian interests. That's not conspiracy. That's from Treasury records. The room was still. Even the moderator had gone pale. And while that summit wasn't criminal, Karoline added, it matters. Because ever since then, Ms. Swift has campaigned against domestic energy independence, lobbied for restrictions that weakened our own markets, and, whether she realized it or not, amplified the exact narratives that foreign actors wanted inside our democracy. Taylor finally broke her silence. That's ridiculous. I attended one summit to discuss renewable energy. You sat across from a Russian energy lobbyist, Karoline snapped, the most emotion she'd shown all night. And then you built an image of environmental purity while attacking American energy workers as dinosaurs and climate criminals. The audience was stunned, both sides. Even Swift supporters didn't know how to react. Taylor tried again. I didn't know who funded that summit. I didn't meet with any foreign investors directly. Karoline raised a single eyebrow. But you used the platform, and it shaped your public stance. And that's the danger. The moderator leaned in, almost whispering into his mic. Miss Swift, do you deny attending the Oslo summit? I don't deny attending, she said firmly. I deny that it meant what she's claiming. I didn't conspire with anyone. I wasn't involved in any dark money. But your silence helped push their message, Karoline said quietly. The line landed hard. Silence again. The studio was holding its breath. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended within minutes. Nar Swift Summit, foreign funded. Nar Karoline drops the bomb. On screen, the debate timer was still running. But the real debate had ended. This was no longer about policy. It was now a question of integrity and perception. As Miles turned to close the round, his voice betrayed the tension he couldn't hide. We'll return after this short break. Stay with us. But no one watching believed it was just a break. Behind the camera, producers whispered. Legal. Teams reviewed statements. And Taylor Swift, for the first time in the debate, was left standing in silence, caught between memory and consequence. Karoline turned away from the podium and sipped her water. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The commercial break was supposed to last 3 minutes. But behind the scenes, the studio had descended into near chaos. Producers huddled. Legal advisors reviewed footage. PR reps for both parties paced nervously. A few tried to convince the host to cut the segment short, to avoid further escalation. But it was too late. The truth bomb had already detonated, and now everyone was scrambling to contain the fallout. Karoline Leavitt sat calmly at her podium, scrolling through her tablet. She wasn't gloating. She didn't need to. The damage had been done. Not just to Taylor Swift's public image, but to the illusion that celebrity and virtue always walked hand in hand. Taylor stood quietly off camera, sipping from a water bottle, eyes locked on her campaign manager, who was whispering something urgently into her ear. Her posture wasn't the same. Shoulders tense, her previously smooth confidence replaced with focused calculation. And then the cameras rolled again. "We are back," Miles said carefully, his voice softer than before. "What started as a conversation on national values has evolved into an unexpected revelation that has raised serious questions. Miss Swift, you now have the floor to respond." The audience leaned forward. Millions of viewers across the country did the same, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, some with knives drawn. Taylor took a breath, then stepped forward. "I want to be clear," she said, her voice steady but low. "I have never taken money from any foreign entity. I attended the Oslo summit to speak on behalf of clean energy. At the time, I was assured by my team that the organization was legitimate. If I had known there were questionable backers, I never would have participated." There were nods from some in the audience, but the MAGA section remained still. Unmoved, she continued, "This is politics. People want to twist every appearance into an agenda. But I've always stood for the same things: women's rights, climate justice, equal opportunity. I don't regret those values, and I won't back down because someone dug up a photo." She looked directly at Karoline. "I'm not afraid of you, or your party." Karoline didn't flinch. She let Swift have the moment, let her swing. Then she calmly stood. "It's not about fear," Karoline said. "It's about accountability." She turned to the camera. "This country is tired of two sets of rules, one for celebrities and one for everyone else. When regular people make mistakes, they lose jobs, face audits, get canceled. When famous people do it, they get interviews and applause." She paused. Her next words came slow and deliberate. "Taylor Swift may not have taken foreign money directly, but her platform has been used, knowingly or not, to promote interests that don't serve the American people. That's not my opinion. That's documented. Verified." A producer signaled from offstage, 30 seconds remaining. Karoline used it. "And while Miss Swift is busy telling young girls to fight the system, I'm here representing the forgotten ones. The working mothers who don't have time to attend summits. The female soldiers who don't get fashion magazine covers, but serve anyway. The rural families who can't afford electric cars, but still care about the planet. They don't get applause, but they matter." Thunderous applause erupted from the conservative side of the audience. Some independents, even, joined in. Even those unsure of Karoline's politics had to admit. She was cutting through. Taylor's response wasn't immediate. Her eyes flickered. She looked back at her team, unsure whether to rebut or remain silent. Then she stepped forward again. "If I've made mistakes, I'll own them," she said, her tone more personal now. "But I won't apologize for using my voice. I've spent my life trying to inspire change, not manipulate it." "And yet," Karoline replied softly, "your silence tonight says more than your lyrics ever could." The moderator stepped in. That concludes the final segment. We'll now take a final question from a member of the audience. A young woman in the front row stood, clearly nervous. She held up a small notebook. "My question is for both of you. I'm 19. I grew up admiring Taylor, but I also want to believe in strong leaders like you, Miss Leavitt. I'm scared. Not of either of you, but of the division. Is there anything left that we all agree on?" The room fell into a rare silence. For a moment, neither woman answered. Then Karoline said, "Truth." and Taylor followed with, "Hope." It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't a debate line, but it was real. Miles nodded slowly. "Perhaps that's where we begin." As the lights dimmed and the credits rolled, no one cheered, no one booed, everyone just thought. The credits had rolled, but the story was far from over. Outside the studio, a storm had begun to brew, not from the skies, but from the screens. Twitter was a battlefield. Instagram was a therapy session. YouTube thumbnails screamed in red and black. Swift exposed. Leavitt goes nuclear. Culture versus Constitution. Who won? News networks rushed to spin the narrative. On CNN, anchors debated whether Karoline Leavitt had crossed a line. On Fox, she was hailed as the new face of unapologetic patriotism. On MSNBC, the conversation turned to celebrity influence and responsibility. But inside the green room, both women sat in separate corners. The performance was over, the audience gone. All that remained was the silence that follows truth. Taylor sat with her publicist, head down, fingers scrolling through her phone. She wasn't crying, but her expression was blank, calculating, almost dazed. Her team was already drafting statements, responses, and damage control plans. But the shock hadn't left her body. "Do I look like I lost?" she asked softly. Her publicist didn't answer right away. "You looked surprised," she said. "That's worse than losing, for people like you." Meanwhile, Karoline stood by a hallway window, talking on the phone with a member of the RNC. Her expression wasn't smug. If anything, she looked distant, as though already thinking 3 steps ahead. "No, I didn't go too hard," she said, quietly. She walked in with the crowd on her side. I walked out with the message. A pause. "No, I don't regret anything." In the parking lot, a group of fans, some with MAGA hats, others with Taylor's merch, stood across from each other shouting. Police had arrived just in case, but it never escalated into violence, just noise, confusion, energy without a clear outlet. And online, a new wave of comments was emerging, not angry, not hateful, but questioning. One user posted, "I love Taylor, but that photo, that funding, we need answers." Another replied, "I'm no Leavitt fan, but she stayed sharp under pressure. Gotta respect that." A third wrote simply, "Why does it feel like we're all being played?" Later that night, Karoline returned to her hotel suite in Washington. She turned on the TV. Every major channel replayed the debate. Analysts broke down her posture, her tone, her strategy. Some called it a masterclass. Others said it was ruthless. She muted the sound and stared at the screen, at herself. Then she picked up a folder from the coffee table, the same one she'd brought to the debate. Inside were more documents, more threads. The photo with the Oslo backers was just one of many. There were financial records, secret speeches, travel logs connected to names most Americans had never heard, but would soon. The debate, she knew, wasn't the climax. It was the trigger. Taylor's mistake wasn't the photo. It was stepping onto a stage where rules weren't written by managers and stylists, but by those who knew how to weaponize information. Across the city, Taylor sat on her hotel bed, TV off, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed every few seconds. Messages from friends, celebrities, political allies. Some were encouraging. Some were furious. She opened one message in particular. It was from an anonymous number. Just a single line. "You've just had your first war. Welcome to Washington." She didn't reply. Instead, she stood up, walked to the mirror, and stared at her reflection. The girl in the white dress, once invincible on stage, now looked like someone else. Older, not weaker, but changed. I'm not done, she whispered. Back in D.C., Karoline poured a glass of water, opened her laptop, and began typing. Phase 2. Foreign Influence in Celebrity Activism. The story was no longer about Taylor Swift. It was about what came next. The question now wasn't who won the debate. It was who controlled the future. And for the first time in years, the line between politics and pop culture had been erased, live, on national television. The real campaign had just begun,